Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we had some very exciting news announced by the NHL and the NHLPA that the NHL players will be returning to the Olympics for the 2022 men's ice hockey tournament in Beijing. This comes, is very, very exciting because of the fact that back in the 2018 Olympics in Pyeongchang in South Korea, NHL players were actually notably absent from that tournament because the NHL could not really come to an agreement with the International Olympic Committee to get NHL players there safely. And this was pretty disappointing for many NHL players who had Olympic hopes. They love to represent their country, and so coming up to this new CBA signed in the past couple of years, NHL players were absolutely dedicated to trying to convince the NHL to get them back to the Olympics, and it seems as though that dedication ended up paying off. So barring any catastrophic events that caused the NHL season to have to go through massive, delays and things like that just due to coronavirus or anything along those lines, the NHL should indeed be returning to the Olympics. So that, for us Sharks fans, begs the question of which Sharks players will be representing their respective countries at the 12-team ice hockey tournament there. Starting off, we will discuss Team Canada, I would say the odds-on favorite to win this tournament, as besides in 2018, where NHL players were not present and as such, Team Russia ended up winning. Team Canada had won the two previous men's ice hockey Olympic tournaments in 2014 and 2010, and 2014 in particular was kind of just a walkthrough for Team Canada. And the Sharks have historically had very good representation on Team Canada. In 2014, it was Patrick Marleau and Marc-Edouard Vlasic from San Jose making that squad, and in 2010 it was actually the Sharks' entire first line of Joe Thornton, Patrick Marleau, and Danny Heatley, as well as their star defenseman Dan Boyle, making it to Team Canada that year. And had Shark or NHL players been allowed at the 2018 Olympics, there likely would have been some Sharks representation. Brent Burns for sure, but also I would suspect Logan Couture. But here in 2022, Brent Burns is a bit over the hill. Team Canada likely going to go skewing a bit more towards the younger defensemen like, Cale Makar or Jacob Chychrun. And in terms of forwards, it's so competitive, and especially with the season that Logan Couture just had for the San Jose Sharks, he's basically got no chance of making it to the roster. And as such, for the first time in a few years, barring 2018, of course, the Sharks will not have any representation on, as I said, the odds-on favorite to win the tournament. For Team USA, the Sharks likely not going to have any representation at this upcoming tournament either. Historically, they have had representation both in 2014 and 2010. Joe Pavelski, longtime San Jose Sharks, had made it to that roster, and here in 2022, he likely would still do so. However, he will be making it with the Dallas Stars instead of with the San Jose Sharks, unfortunately. The next team in Team A would be Team Germany. They are actually defending their silver medal from the 2018 Olympics, though they'll probably be very hard pressed to defend said medal, considering, of course, NHL players will be present again at this Olympics. Historically, the Sharks have had Thomas Greiss all the way back in 2010 representing San Jose Sharks, but otherwise not really much representation there, as Germany only recently has become much of a hockey, an Olympic hockey presence at the top level. And while Leon Bergman is technically a German player on the Sharks roster, it's very unlikely he makes it to the German national team. And finally, there is, of course, Team China. They made it into this Olympic tournament just thanks to the fact that China is, of course, holding the Olympics in 2022. And no surprise that the Sharks have not had any historical representation on Team China, and that they will not have any players on Team China for this upcoming tournament. Moving into Group B, we have the defending gold medalists in Team Russia. The Sharks historically have not really had any powerhouse Russian players on their squad, so haven't really had any Russian players make it there. And currently, for this upcoming season, the best Russian player that the Sharks have is probably Barabanov, and barring some incredible 50-goal season coming out from him in the 21-22 year, there will not be any Sharks player representing Team Russia. For Team Czech Republic, we finally get to our first Sharks player, actually our first two Sharks players, as the first one would be Tomas Turtle, who is just an absolute shoo-in to make it to this roster. He'll probably even end up being the number one center, as long as, of course, he doesn't end up getting traded prior to this actual tournament start, Tomas Turtle would be likely the best Sharks player to be representing their country at the Olympic tournament. But also, there would likely be a chance that Radim Shemek makes it. As long as he manages to maintain a top 6 spot in the Sharks defensive core, he likely will make it as a top 6, maybe backup defender for the Czech Republic, depending on what options they actually have available to them. We saw Shemek take a back step this past season, so as long as he doesn't take another big back step this season, he should be representing Team Czech Republic with Tomas Turtle at the Olympics. Moving on to Team Switzerland. Switzerland is a Olympic roster that is headlined by just a few very big names: Roman Josi, Kevin Fiala, Nico Hischier, and of course Timo Meier from the San Jose Sharks. He definitely seems to love playing for his Olympic team, for Team Switzerland, and so hopefully that can help get his confidence back and help him out in seasons in the future. He will be representing San Jose there. For Team Denmark, a team that had to qualify through the qualification tournament just to make it to this tournament, will be represented with some San Jose Sharks players. It would have been more than one had Seattle not taken Alexander True in the expansion draft, but instead the Sharks will be left with just a single representation on Team Denmark, and that would be Joachim Blichfeld, a player who is likely going to be bouncing around the San Jose Sharks and the San Jose Barracuda in this upcoming season, but technically a Sharks-owned player, and as such, he counts as representation. Moving on to Group C, we have Team Finland. Haven't been much historical representation on Team Finland for the San Jose Sharks, and in this upcoming Olympic tournament, the Sharks will not have really any Finnish players there. I don't think there's even a Finnish player on the main Sharks roster at this point. Moving on to Team Sweden. Historically, the Sharks have had Douglas Murray, at the very least, representing Team Sweden at the Olympics, and this season they will of course have Erik Carlson. Now, while back in the 2018 Olympics had NHL players participated, Erik Carlson would have been absolutely a shoo-in number 1 defenseman, no questions asked. At the 2022 Olympics, just due to the downturn that Erik Carlson has seen over the past couple of years in his career, while he'll still likely make the team, he's likely going to be viewed more so as a top 4 defenseman in that regard. Still, he will indeed be Sharks representation. Moving on to this next team is Slovakia. The Sharks have not really had a ton of Slovakian representation in the past at the Olympics, and this year will be no different. The Sharks do not, similar to Finland, do not really have any Slovakian players on the main roster. And finally, we have Team Latvia, another team that had to qualify here for this Olympic tournament, and the Sharks will actually have some pretty big representation there, with Rudolf Balcers being really the main forward on Team Latvia, or at least one of the main players on Team Latvia. He'll hopefully try and get them some good games. It's hard to imagine that they're going to be winning much, if winning at all, but maybe they can get a game over a team like Team Slovakia, and Rudolf Balcers would likely be a big part of that, just judging by his performance in some qualifications games just to get them to this tournament. But that will do it for looking at these Sharks players. I am very excited for the Olympics. I'm a bit of an Olympic fiend myself. I love the Olympics. I love the Olympic ice hockey as well, and I'm very excited to watch this. Class dismissed.